I was asked to kind of show how the TARC Superlink system is set up. These little circles are just circles. We've never went to the trouble of setting up the actual pattern for all of this stuff. In other words, we've got software that would show the different repeaters depending on their power, the antenna, and the height, how far out they reach. Each one of these circles is somewhere around 25 miles, except for Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh, I know, covers a whole lot more than what that circle shows.
It's not unusual to hear Kavanaugh in South Tulsa.
But right now, you won't hear Kavanaugh at all because it's off the air. Decatur up here is also off the air. There's Jack Backer takes care of Decatur, and the repeater's okay, but his antenna system is broke. That's the only one that I know that is down at the present time, is Kavanaugh and Decatur. When you start up in the corner up there with Ponca City, Butch Herring takes care of. Out of Ponca City, it belongs to the Ponca City Club, and they run a Yaesu DR2X with an RCOM 210 controller in order to make it work, and it uses a max track for the link radio. Bartlesville uses a Motorola MTR 2000 with a max track for the link radio, and it belongs to me. Nowata uses a Kenwood repeater with a max track for the link, and it belongs to me. Afton uses a Motorola MTR 2000 with a max track, and it belongs to me. All of these come direct to the Tulsa hub. That's not true, Ponca City doesn't. And so all of those upper ones go straight to the hub. The Tulsa hub at the present time has a MyCore. It does not have any link radios because it doesn't need it. Everything links to it. We're in the process of rebuilding it. We're going to have a system with a Motorola MTR 2000, a 100-watt amplifier, a spare MTR 2000. It's going to run through an RCOM 210 controller, and we have a spare RCOM 210 controller sitting, not hot, just sitting there. And the only thing, everything's wired up, everything's ready. Right now, the controller needs to be programmed. And that's because yours truly is just too lazy to do it. Decatur is an oddball. He uses 4 radios. I've offered him an MTR 2000, but he doesn't want it because he doesn't understand it. So he uses 4 max tracks to make that system work. And it's a really strange setup that he's got there. It works well when it's up. And we've also given him 4 max track radios so he can get it back working and have spares. Fayetteville, I don't know anything about Fayetteville. I don't know what they use or even what they're doing. Kavanaugh, let's see, I'll go to Kavanaugh next down here. Kavanaugh uses a, they were using an MSF 5000, I'm not really sure, with a max track for the link radio, but I'm not sure what they're using. It was broken into, stuff was stolen, stuff was replaced. It's been a real zoo down there up on the mountain. It's actually on Kavanaugh Mountain. And McAllister has a MyCore, and Jerry takes care of it. I don't remember Jerry's last name. And it uses a max track, and it goes direct to the Tulsa hub as Kavanaugh goes direct to the Tulsa hub.
When you say direct to the Tulsa hub, what do you mean by that?
Okay. The link radio, let's see, I guess I'll go back and start this spiel over. On a dark and stormy night, Tim Deal had a flash of thought, who was, I don't know, 25 years ago, had a flash of thought that
Late 1990s.
about building a system that would cover northeast Oklahoma. Then he went out to all the other groups are scattered all around and said, do you want to participate? And some did, some didn't. And later on, others came in. And when I say link, there's a repeater that sits there just like any repeater. You know, it sets up on the hill, you take your handy-talkie, you hit it, and it goes out. And then people receive it and it comes back. The link does it at the same time. You go into the repeater, it goes over to another radio through a 2-port controller. One port of the controller is for the repeater and the other port's for the link. And then that goes straight, most of them go straight to the Tulsa hub, the 850 repeater, the main repeater.
So that controller receives from the repeater the fact that somebody's keyed up the repeater,
Right.
The COE, the signal,
Right?
and that keys the other transmitter, the link transmitter. And then there's an audio path now that they share. From that radio's receiver
Right.
goes back into the repeater, and from that repeater's output goes into the mixer in the controller out to that link radio. So now when you key up the repeater, 2 radios key up on 2 different frequencies.
Okay.
One radio is the link radio that is on whatever repeater it talks to's frequency, operating just like you would to key up that repeater.
Right.
Okay, so that mobile, it's like a mobile radio, just like you'd have in most cases. Okay,
What delay are they set at?
there's no delay.
Okay.
The delays are all set to 0. And there is some latency in these systems. And when we get to the Far East, I started with Ponca City and I shouldn't have. Then that's when we get into the delay. Manford, I'm going down through here, Kavanaugh, McAllister, Muskogee is an MTR 2000 repeater, and it has a link radio made out of a Motorola Max Track. Now this link radio, to make it real easy, is just like you had it at home. So it's backwards. In other words, it transmits on 448-850 and receives on 443-850. So it's just like your radio at home. If you're going to 850, then the link radios on all these systems do the same thing. It's good and bad. It's good in that it works. It's bad in that you've got 443-850 sitting out here that is upside down to what the repeater is. Colorado's upside down to what the repeater is for their repeaters. So it causes problems when there's band openings because we've got these things scattered all over northeast Oklahoma.
Right. So think of it that way. So
And it's just,
we have this wide area of 443 receiver transmitter pair radios.
Right.
They're not just by the repeater, they're out in the greater open, like Bob's talking about. And so the one that sits out on Manford, for example, is on a very tall tower and up on a hill, and it can readily receive Colorado transmissions that are reversed, right? And so now that radio thinks that it's hearing the Tulsa hub, but it's not hearing the Tulsa hub, it's hearing Colorado. So then it hears Colorado and it keys up the Manford repeater with Colorado's signal.
So how do you know when that's happening? How do you hear it?
Well, you hear it. If you're in the Manford repeater area, you hear it.
Okay.
it chases its tail. That's how you know it's happening, because it keeps 850 keyed up. And you try to figure out where it's coming from, and if you've listened to it enough, you know, okay, that's, in other words, skip. coming through, but it's legal skip that's coming through.
You know, Bartlesville has the same problem, Newata has the same problem. All those that are on the first layer out from the hub in that northeastern aiming direction, or northwestern aiming direction, all here in Colorado.
Yeah, coming back.
No. The way these are supposed to be set up is each one of these repeaters is supposed to have a clear channel for 120 miles. Most of them do. They've reduced that to 75 miles now, and they all have that. But because these link radios are out on the very end, they do not have the same spacing as what the main repeater does. But we're getting off on all kinds of other crap here, so just keep your stuff to yourself and we'll go
Well,
on.
it's good, 'cause this is education for someone like me.
Yeah,
that
you just
knows
don't,
nothing about it.
Guthrie has the same problem with a repeater out in western Oklahoma. That's on Stillwater's frequency.
so Kavanaugh, McAllister, Muskogee, Mounds is a GE Master 2. It's supposed to be changed out, but they also tell me at least once a year that they're going to kick us off that tower, but they never have so far. It's a commercial tower. It has TV equipment on it and some small TV stations and other stuff. And they always say, well, the owner's going to ask you guys to leave off of it because of the loading on the tower. Now, and we'll go back through these in a minute as far as how high they are. Tahlequah, Manuel Holland takes care of that. And it's same thing. It links direct to Tulsa or to 850.
Type of radio?
Tahlequah is a Yaesu DR1X with a max track. And it doesn't matter what kind of radio it is. Hell, they're just repeaters. Mounds is the only oddball. The repeater's ready to put in, but getting to Mounds is a challenge, to say the least, of getting down there. You have to either have Tim or his helper Chris to guide you through the farmer's gates to get to this site where it's at, and then you can change the stuff out. And if it's wet, you can't get there. So the Mounds is 500 feet up a 1,000-foot tower. So that repeater's in the air. Manford is located in the city of Manford at Cimarron Telephone Company. It's a MTR 2000 with a max track. It's up 500 feet on top of their tower. So, go over here. Guthrie, Edmond, depending on what you want to call it. Stillwater and Ponca City all link into Manford. And those are all the west, what we call the west section. So if you're having problems, you can bust Manford off. In other words, tell it don't repeat anymore, and you can tell it's none of those repeaters causing the problem. Most of these, we really can't do that with. But all of them have been changed out to modern programmable repeaters, with the exception of Mounds and the Tulsa Hub. The Tulsa Hub's a Mi-Core running 100 watts, well, really 80 watts, and it's soon to be totally redone. We've had trouble with it in the last couple of months. First of all, we had a power supply crap out. Then we had 2 PA decks, power amplifier decks crap out. And we've had spares for all this stuff in order to put it back in and rebuild it and make it work. As of 30 minutes ago, well, really an hour and a half ago, it was still working okay. Not to say it won't quit in the next hour. But the main thing is that this gives the Tulsa Weather Service who is what this originally was built for, so that the Tulsa Weather Service could cover their service area. Guthrie, Edmond, Stillwater were added in later on. They're actually serviced out of Oklahoma City Weather Service office. The Guthrie Edmond is set up so that the Oklahoma City EOC can talk to the Tulsa EOC. That's really why that menagerie is there. I'm not sure how high McAllister's tower is. Kavanaugh's up about 150 foot, but the mountain itself is up about 800, between 800
Call the
and
mountain, it's 1,000 foot to the highest peak,
yeah.
and they're not quite on the highest peak, but it's close to 900 feet.
Fayetteville, like I said, I don't know anything about Fayetteville. Decatur's up 100 feet on a hill. Afton is on GRDA Tower at Buffalo Ranch, right in that vicinity. It's up 120 feet on top of that tower. Belongs to GRDA, and they let us on there. The Nowata is on a commercial radio station. We're up 300 feet on a 1,000-foot tower there. Bardensville, we're up 150 feet on a 300-foot tower. Manford, like I said, is up 500 feet at the top of Simtail's tower. The Tulsa Hub is at 500 feet out by Lind Lane on a tower. And Mounds is 500 feet on a 1,000-foot tower. Guthrie Edmond is an oddball because the receiver is at 950 feet and the transmitter is down at 250 feet because he's got them split. And it shares an antenna with a 900 megahertz system with a splitter on it, is how he does that. Dan Schrader takes care of it. He also takes care of Stillwater. Stillwater is up about 350 feet on a 1,000-foot tower at a radio station.
Dan is a retired engineer for KOSU.
Yeah. And so that's that's how it works. And when you look at it from an RF perspective, your first thought is there's no way in hell this will ever work because these things will step all over each other. It's just, when you get them out there, the RF's going to step all over. But then you have to remember that only one link radio comes up at a time. So therefore, if you're in Bardensville, you're on the Bardensville repeater, the Bardensville link radio comes up, it attaches it to Tulsa, which then blasts it out to all these other locations. But it's not like you've got 3 or 4 of the 850 upside down frequencies beating out there. You've only got the one. The Tulsa hub is definitely the linchpin for the whole thing. If it's down, everything reverts back to a single repeater. There's no more linking because it all links through the Tulsa hub. It's called a star configuration.
It keeps us from having to allocate a lot of leak frequencies and have all those in some form of receiver, massive receiver collection at the hub. If we had to have massive transceivers for all the leaks at the Tulsa hub, that would make it very fragile.
It's cheap and dirty. That's the easiest way to say it, okay? And so it fits the ham mode extremely well because it's cheap and
it's simple-minded.
it's fairly simple. You just have to, each one of these repeaters though has 2 radios.
And a controller, and that's the important part.
Controller is the magic. What about the antenna system? What's it like for the receiver and the antenna?
Do what?
The antenna system for both radios, what does that look like?
There's 2 antennas at each system. Usually the high for the repeater, The link radio is usually down about 30 or 40 feet.
And it's on a, there's usually a corner reflector or some highly directional.
Most of them,
Pointing at the repeater system so that we don't have to worry about interference with local use.
most of the link radios, there's one that's on a corner reflector, which is Manford. The rest of them are on 10 element Yagis. They have 10 dB gain forward and about 20 dB in the rear is what they have.
When there's an interfering signal, we usually talk to everyone about the fact that you can listen for the repeater input by pushing the reverse button on your radio if you have one of those, or have a frequency switch to switch transmit and receive. But think about always that the link radio, if you're between the link radio and the hub of any of these repeater systems, you can also listen on the 850 frequency to see if you hear it coming over that, to say, okay, well, I can't hear 850, but I hear it on the link radio, so I must, must be from the repeater.
And power-wise,
Power-wise, most of the MTRs are 40 watt units. Some of them have an amplifier. Some of them are 100 watt units, but we're not running over 80 watts at any of the locations as far as the repeater goes. The link radios are from 5 to 7 watts. That's all it takes to go. You can go from here to the Tulsa hub with about 7 watts.
And those are about 20 dB gain antennas
Yeah.
in most cases.
10 dB.
10, okay.
And they work fairly well. The weakest one of all of them is Afton as far as the link portion goes, and we'll probably end up turning it to hit Nowata and then come to Tulsa. We haven't done it yet. This is just the super system. It's not all of the repeaters that are in this area. This is only the super system. My biggest gripe is when you got somebody in South Tulsa talking to somebody in West Tulsa and they go through the Superlink system. It's a hell of a waste of resources to key every one of these repeaters up to talk to someone 10 miles away. We've got other repeaters that are perfect for that. I didn't show channel 8 on here because it's not part of the link system per se, but there's a UHF system up there on 443.750 that's really a backup for 850 that is a monster coverage system. There's also a VHF repeater up there that is on 145.110 that's got really great coverage. Now there's also a VHF repeater at the hub that is on 145.170 that covers really good. And there's one out at Manford on 147.045, and all of these, by the way, are 88.5 PL with the exception of Decatur, and that's why I put the PL for Decatur. Echo Link should be running on 170. Echo Link is a internet-based system, and the actual unit sets at a Mike Foster's house out east of Broken Arrow, and he just hasn't got it back up. He moved and he didn't put it back up.
And also at West Tulsa we have the 443 machine. If you have a Yaesu, WireX configuration is at my house, so I provide WireX gateway to that repeater in digital mode. So if you have Fusion Digital, you can get to 443 and go anywhere in the world.
There's Yaesu, that's full-time Yaesu Digital, the 443.000.
Yeah.
The VHFs are mixed mode. You can run Fusion through them or you can run analog through them. Just depends on what you want to do. There's also a wide area DMR system that goes all the way to Oklahoma City. There's also a 220 link system on All-Star. I'm not going to get into those tonight.
Okay.
And the reason I'm not going to get into them is because they cloud this, and this is what most of the people want to know about.
Question, real quick. What causes the delay that we always hear when you use an example, Paul talking about, it could take 4 seconds for your signal to reach these outer.
What causes the delay is that, okay, let's just pick Guthrie-Edmond. Guthrie-Edmond has its native delay, which is a half second. Then it has to go through Stillwater, which also adds at least a half second. Then it has to go through Manford, which also delays it another half second or so. Then it finally makes it to 443850, which also has about a half second delay turnaround time. We're talking from transmit to receive. So from Guthrie, you can see you got 1, 2, 3, 4 delays. And so that's why you say, hey, give it at least 3 or 4 seconds when you unkey before you key back up. It also lets all the controllers drop so that they don't sit there and stay keyed all the time. If they do, then they kick out after so many minutes, and they'll stay out until the conversation's quit and they can reset. So if you let them reset, then that's not a problem.
So if you're in Tulsa, you're the hub, and you key up and you start saying your call sign, somebody in Guthrie didn't hear it.
Probably not.
Okay.
They'll hear the last 3 characters of it. They'll usually miss the prefix and the suffix, or the number.
Pause, and I guess hit the key and pause.
Do what?
Would you want to pause after you hit the key, like you just described before you talk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple
Key,
seconds.
pause,
Yeah.
3 seconds, and then, okay,
Yeah,
makes sense.
right. That just gives them time to drop out.
And no matter what kind of radios or configuration, unless it was direct, it would have the same problem.
Right.
So are there any other intermediate hubs? You were talking about Guthrie to Stillwater to Manford to Tulsa. Is there anywhere else in this hub and spoke that has intermediate hubs that relay, that outer edges relay to the inner hub and then on to Tulsa hub?
Only Ponca City. Ponca City goes straight to Manford and then comes to Tulsa.
Okay,
It's too far to get from Ponca City to Tulsa.
got it.
And what's not on here was we used to have a site down on Buffalo Mountain. And like Poto, it was high enough that we could shoot direct to Tulsa even there. And that provided a hop to a repeater system that was down in Texas. So we did have a repeater down on the border south of Oklahoma.
There's about 3 systems that have been taken down over time. She says the one down Buffalo Mountain. There was one in Paris, Texas that was on and off. And there was one at Daisy that also has pretty well been taken out. They say
Daisy and you follow.
they'll link it when it needs to be. And there was one on the Channel 3 tower. So, yes.
So last week I was in a big communications exercise near Joplin, and there was some ham radio elements to it and some Oxcom things, and so I took a few of those injects on. But I contacted Paul about trying to get on the Superlink system and see if he could hear me. And the repeater came back to me and identified, and it would act like I was transmitting, and it was picking me up, but Paul couldn't hear me at all in Tulsa. Does that sound like it just wasn't engaging the entire Superlink system, it was acting locally only? Or, because this would have been the Afton repeater that I dialed into.
The Afton repeater, that's what I said, it's on the very edge of coverage. And it needs to be linked over to Nowata,
Right.
and then that would take care of that particular issue.
It acted like I was talking on it, but
Yeah.
it just wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
So,
And Bob and Tim before him have historically done really good jobs of tuning the antenna systems and the cans and everything in these repeaters, which means that they hear really well. And so it's really easy to get a weak RF signal into them and cause them to key up without any audio in your signal because you're so far away.
So Paul, you couldn't hear anything, right?
No, I knew it was him, the repeater would come on, but the audio was not
Yeah.
there.
Well, all of these have PL on them, and so that means that it has to have enough signal to recognize that 88.5 tone to turn it on. And you can hit it and still not turn that tone on because it's too weak or it has too much noise. Either way. It's a really good system. It works very well. It's got, it's been broadened out to the point to where it doesn't have 9999 operability. It's down to about 99%. So the 99% in the ham world is pretty good. To get 4 nines requires another couple bushel baskets full of money.
When Tim was young and had to run out to all of these sites to look after the paging network that allowed us access to all these sites, he spent a lot of time just looking at the radios and doing can tuning regularly and all kinds of stuff because he was there and he could do it.
And he got paid for
And he
it.
got paid for it. He was not only that, right? And so Bob's volunteer time is to keep it running, not to improve it. And so he tries to improve it as best he can whenever he can. And he spends a lot of time that we don't give him a lot of credit for. But ultimately, you know, as he's saying, you know, we're operating, we're working, the radios key up, everything happens the way it's supposed to in the general case. And it's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, Paul.
I think I know the answer to this question, but
Okay. Answer it.
Greg, your control over the repeater as the repeater trustee, you have the ability to kill the repeater.
I can turn off the transmitter.
It will
on the
only
hub.
turn off 850.
I can
No.
turn off the transmitter on 850, and I have a way to turn off the transmitters on some of the other outlying repeaters
That was my
are
question.
that are ours. And I can call Bob, and he can do it if I'm not in RF range.
Yeah.
What really happens is Fayetteville, I don't have a clue what they're using. I don't know what their controller is. I don't know what their codes are. I don't know any of it. Kavanaugh, I know what they are because we gave it to them. We, being TARC, gave them the controller. All of these were set up with CAT, Computer Automation Technologies, 200B controllers on all of these systems except for the hub. And originally they had CAT 500s that were modified to
Re-engineered.
work. Yeah, you can say that. And we've gotten rid of all of them except mounds. I've replaced every one of these repeaters. All the old GE repeaters that were out there except for mounds are gone. All the old MyCore repeaters that were out here. Now here's, I should have brought pictures. I may have. A MyCore repeater stands up about this tall. And it weighs about this tall. And you can't just put it in your car and haul it home and work on it. You have to work on it on site. So if you didn't bring a bushel basket full of parts, you make multiple trips to take care of it. With the MTR 2000s, which are about this thick, about that wide, about that deep, you can carry them. Anybody can carry them. And we have spares, so we can just take a whole nother repeater out there and put it in. We don't have to do this other rigging that we've done for years
For all
on
the
the other.
overall radio systems.
And it made a lot of difference. Used to, when I first retired, I spent about 5 days a week going to repeaters. And I only spend about 2 days a week. So, I mean, or a day a week. Sometimes I don't go to them for a long time. But a lot of this, I've had people say, I want to help you, I want to learn how to do it. It's hard to bring people into it. David Kennedy came out to the 850 site and said he wanted to be involved. and what was the other guy's name? Matt. And I never see them. I mean, I don't call them. Paul wants to be involved. He wants to be involved in the controllers and everything, but it takes so much time to program the controller that you're not going to get it done in 2 or 3 hours. You got a lot of time involved in it, and that's what's wrong with 850 right now. Is we've changed over to a totally different type of controller. Right now, it is a CAT, Computer Aided Automation Technologies 1000. The CAT 1000 is a very good repeater controller. It works very well, but Computer Automation Technologies went out of business when the owner died, and the guy that was doing all the support for it said, I'm not doing it anymore. So getting any support for a CAT controller, you're out of luck. The CAT 200Bs, we're fortunate we have, 2 or 3 spares, and they rarely ever break. There's one ship that goes bad, and that's it. But all the rest of it works really well, and they're a 2-port controller, which means they control the local repeater and they can control a link radio. The ARCOM RC210 that we're changing over to for the main hub, they are still in business. They do have good support, and they you can actually hook 3 repeaters up to it if you want to. We don't need to.
Just hook up the weather radio.
Yeah. Now, the weather radio, we don't even need it for that. All we really need it for is the repeater. But the reason we chose it rather than some El Cheapo was that it has a digital voice recorder, so you can record messages onto it. It has canned messages that you can put into it. It has all that. Now, since Greg brought it up, the weather receiver 850 today uses a WX1000 to go with the CAT 1000. The one we're going to put in is a WX250 that will go to the ARCOM controller, but it doesn't go to the ARCOM controller. The way it works is you break off the push to talk and you break off the transmit audio, and they go through the weather receiver. So when the weather receiver receives a signal and hears it, it says, I don't care who you are, if you're talking, you're just gone because I am the boss. So therefore, I'm going to transmit my information. So if you're on there when the weather receiver comes up, you're gone. And the weather receiver takes over. And that's kind of the way it should be. So there's a lot of little intricacies to how all this stuff works. And then you've got the macros, so you can make it WX5 TUL and other things like that that are way beyond what I should get into here. Okay?
Hey Bob, we've got policies, I know, and they're posted on the website along with a list of repeaters and everything, but if someone, let's say Joppa or Shawnee, wants to put up a repeater and link to the system, what's the deal?
No. That's the deal to it. I mean, they've got to meet the technical requirements. That's number one. Number two is that they've got to give us all the codes so we can turn it on and off. And number three is that they got to cover a lot of space to get there. From either one of those.
So they need to have an antenna system that'll reach the hub.
So
for the link.
I send them to Greg because my automatic answer is no. And then they come back for why.
I can usually run them off.
And my answer to the why is because you're just going to screw the whole system up.
But, we've had a number of issues with the McAllister crowd because of where they're at and the terrain around them and what they have to fight with. And so the Eufaula repeater and Daisy, wherever they put it, all in that area, they've constantly had problems and had to go through Mounds instead of to the hub, just because they don't have a path, given all of the terrain that's around the south side of Tulsa. There's a lot of hills and a lot of things that you just, from south of Tulsa, you can't get there without being up as high as all that other stuff is. And so the terrain over on the east side of Tulsa area, up in the Tahlequah and Mounds, photos we've talked about, those things are, 1,000 foot up, easy path.
All the repeaters that were originally set up are all on high sites. They're all high site repeaters. None of them are garage repeaters. None of them at that time were even 100-foot repeaters. They were all up 500 feet, 350 feet or so. And the 100-foot ones are on a pretty good hill, or they wouldn't be there.
It was all because of the paging systems that they were, placed near.
They were originally on paging towers that, like Greg said, Tim took care of, and so did Jerry Moyer. They both worked for a paging company. And if something went wrong with one of the repeaters, they'd write themselves a ticket that said, I need to do PMs at this site, preventing maintenance. And they'd go to the site, and they might do PMs, but they'd fix the repeater. Well, when Tim got laid off, went to work for himself, he just dumped it. He quit working on any of it, disavowed all knowledge of it. And it went to hell. I can tell you, when I first came into the Tulsa Club, half these repeaters didn't work. They didn't work because they'd never been maintained, and they were old stuff that needed to be massaged
for free
constantly.
Of all the 150 megahertz VHF repeaters for IMSA and everything else that had been discontinued, turned off when they moved to 800 megahertz, all that other stuff. He got stuff given to him, and that's what he used.
Most of it came from, I forgot their name now, but it was a radio common carrier that had these repeaters, and when they shut all those down, then through Tim's paging company, which also this other company owned, he glommed onto all this equipment. I mean, tons of it. And then over time, we have obliterated it.
He had a whole house that he grew up in next to his current house that was full of this stuff.
But these, that's old history. I should have started this.
I'm just trying to let everyone know that this wasn't something that we poured a whole lot of money into, and a lot of stuff happened. There were two people that poured a lot of money into what happened. Charlie Case, who's now Silent Key, spent a lot of money building a lot of antenna systems for the club. And he bought tons of stainless steel straps and all kinds of stuff to hang coax. Tim would find coax everywhere. He could get coax, he could get antennas, but hanging it was still money. And Charlie Case paid a lot of money to make that happen.
Charlie Case put over $10,000 into this system at the time. He was retired. He didn't have anything else to do. And he kind of took Tim under his wing as a son and said, here's a shovel full of money, go do something with it. Or Tim would go to him and tell him, I need a basket full of money, and Charlie would supply. That's when it all first started. But historically, the Tulsa Amateur Radio Club owns very few of these repeaters. Very few of these repeaters does TARC own. Tim's gift of gab got him to go out to all these different clubs and get them to support this system. And so that's how the system grew. And we have turned around on some of these sites where the people have left that originally were there and given them equipment in order to better our system, but they still own it. And I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on and why sometimes things just don't get fixed overnight. Mike?
So Bob, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Doesn't matter. I'm just gonna ask you, would you say that at the present design of this system here, you're kind of at max with it, or would you try to grow it if you wanted to?
It could be grown, but I wouldn't grow it because it supports the National Weather Service. That is the main goal of this system. The main goal is not so you can talk to your buddy 10 miles away or even 100 miles away. The main goal is so when there's a weather event, the National Weather Service, even though they can't operate it, they have a station at the National Weather Service, and a ham can operate it and relay the information to all these different sites and back to them. Originally, the UHF system was only supposed to talk to EOCs in all these counties. But it, like everything else in ham radio, has gotten totally screwed up over the years to where everyone uses this. They don't use 88. They don't use 655 in Barboursville for their local EOC. So you can bitch and gripe and holler, but it doesn't do you any good. It's just like my main peeve is somebody in Tulsa talking to somebody in Tulsa on this system when there's repeaters all over Tulsa that are wonderful repeaters that work really, really well. And we've put a lot of resources and money into just to get off this system. The bike rides that used to use this system. So we said, no, let's move it off this system, because why should we have a bike ride in Tulsa keying up a McAllister repeater? We shouldn't. So now we use the 443750 and the 145110 mainly for the bike races.
You know, this Bob was alluding to, the idea was basically the EOCs would operate in these outlying areas. They would be running VHF spotter networks, doing all of their local storm spotting and event, processing locally, but they could hear and then reinforce about any sort of warning that the National Weather Service was making about, hey, we see this on radar, does anyone have any other information? And the local VHF nets would pipe up and say, the spotter confirms there's a tornado on the ground. That's all the National Weather Service needs to hear.
So does that happen today in a weather event? Is it utilized?
When it says WX5TUL, everybody gets off of it, but yes, Joe Blow, the spotter out here, uses the super system to tell God and everybody else that he had 6 raindrops on a brick outside of his house, okay? I mean, I'm just being honest. That's what happens.
Got me size cell all
And I don't
over the
care.
Is that original material, 6 raindrops on a brick?
Yeah. That's old phone company talk.
So ultimately, everybody in Oklahoma is tremendously helpful.
Yeah.
What they don't realize is that we need the right kind of help.
This repeater here, when Dan put it up, it was to let the guys down at Norman, the National Weather Service there, get into this and talk to the National Weather Service in Tulsa. Do they use it? No. Could they use it? Yes. Could the EOCs use it? Yes, and they have used it on some of their sets and things to talk back and forth.
Ultimately, there's a 147045 repeater at Cyril, Oklahoma that you can see right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that repeater is what Norman and the whole area uses for that southwestern Oklahoma area.
And we have 147045 at Manford.
We've had Oklahoma City EOC check in on weather nets up here.
They have started. They have started to.
Well, it's a wonderful system. It was designed for a purpose. The purpose has been somewhat diddled around with.
It's horribly convenient to just let it sit.
So the best thing to do is just, if you know someone, say, hey, let's move off to 14511, or let's move off to.
Yeah. Ask them,
These
can
other
you reach
frequencies.
11? Can you reach 045? Can you reach something I can reach and move?
That's
Pick
a
up your phone and call them, yeah. I mean, that's always that.
Spirit of ham radio.
Welcome to ham radio. We use anything we can, anytime we can.
Radio. Stop using ham radio.
Sir?
So I was going to ask a question, and maybe everybody else already knows. I'm just curious, what, you said you're retired now, but what did you do before you retired? I'm just curious.
I worked for the telephone company for about 35 years. Mike Shelton worked there at the same time, more or less. And I worked in various parts there. The part I worked that helped me here was what they called toll, or I worked in the microwave systems and landline systems. And then they let I moved from there to marketing, and they let 10,000 of us managers go. If you wanted to, you didn't have to, but it was highly suggested that you leave on November the 15th of 2000. There was 10,000 managers that were out of a job on November the 16th. And so then I went to work for Motorola for about a year, doing contract work, various contracts. Did the city of Tulsa when somebody flubbed up and on their 800 meg system and didn't get new licenses, and we had to reprogram all the radios. And then I worked for, now it's ConocoPhillips in the RF department, as does Brian wherever he went. And I worked there a little over 9 years. I went to work there for 3 months to buy a TIG welder and forgot to leave. And then we started doing this, but I've been doing this for a long time. And I don't know how to impart knowledge to someone else. I mean, you just gotta jump in and do it. Test equipment, I don't know, I probably got $20,000 tied up in test equipment. You don't have to get that much tied up anymore, but you can't just go out there with a voltmeter and a straight razor. You got to have a few other tools to work with.
The TDM is very helpful.
Do what?
The TDM is very helpful.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, I'm sorry.
Really helpful, Bob. Thank you so much.